The bear rose slowly from the den, as it always did, not because it was ready, but because the body had decided that waiting any longer no longer made sense. Muscles uncoiled with stiffness earned through months of stillness. Claws scraped lightly against packed earth and old leaves as weight shifted forward for the first time in a season. The bear paused just inside the den's mouth. Normally, this moment came with signals. Water moving. Birds calling. Drips of melt sliding through soil and stone. Spring usually announced itself loudly enough that even a bear, dulled by hibernation, could not miss it. This time, nothing spoke. The forest outside lay muted and flat. Snow still clung to shaded ground in thin, stubborn patches, but it was old snow, compacted, grey, inert. No fresh melt ran downhill, no softened soil gave underfoot. The air was cold, but not sharp. It was undecided. The bear lifted its head and tested the air. Scent came slowly, reluctantly. Damp earth was present, but faint. The smell of new growth, sharp, green, insistent, was missing. Insects did not rise. No buzzing cut the quiet. No bird crossed the clearing in sudden motion. The silence was complete. The bear stepped fully out of the den and stood upright for a moment, a dark mass against pale ground. Its fur hung heavy and dull, shedding bits of dried grass and dust as it moved. Hunger stirred low in the body, not urgent yet, but present, measuring the world for what it would offer. The world offered little. The bear dropped back to all fours and took several slow steps forward. Each step should have found softer ground. Instead, soil remained firm, resistant, as if winter had loosened its grip without letting go. This was wrong. In past springs, the forest shifted before the bear did. Sound returned first, then movement, then scent. The bear followed those cues outward, confident that food would soon follow. Roots, shoots, carrion, weakened animals. Here, cues were missing. The bear stopped again and listened. Wind moved faintly through branches high above, but did not reach the forest floor. No water ran beneath ice. No distant cracking signalled thaw. Even the trees seemed restrained, bare limbs holding still instead of swaying. The bear felt exposed, not to danger, but to uncertainty. Emerging from the den was a commitment. Energy spent now had to be replaced soon. A silent spring meant delays. Delays meant longer searching. Longer searching meant cost. The bear moved downhill toward a familiar seep where meltwater usually surfaced early. The ground sloped gently, shaded by trees that caught snow longer than open areas. The bear remembered this place well. The seep was dry, not frozen, simply absent. The bear lowered its head and sniffed the soil. Moisture lay deep beneath the surface, locked away. Whatever warmth had reached the forest had not reached far enough. The bear lifted its head again. No birds called. No insect stirred. No prey moved. The forest behaved like it was waiting for permission. The bear turned slightly, orienting toward a broader clearing where sunlight might have done more work. There, too, nothing moved. Old snow reflected dull light without sparkle. Grass lay pressed flat, yellowed and lifeless. The bear stood still for a long time. This was not the spring it expected. The body had woken on schedule, fat reserves thinning, instincts pressing outward, but the season had not caught up. The usual exchange had failed. The bear had kept its part of the cycle. The world had not. As the bear finally took another step forward, heavier this time, it understood something without naming it, that this year would not unfold by memory alone. That the silence outside the den was not temporary hesitation, but a condition. Spring had arrived in name only, and as the bear moved deeper into a forest that refused to announce itself, hunger waiting just behind awareness, it began a season not guided by familiar signals, but by absence, restraint, and the slow realization that when spring came silently, survival would depend less on strength than on judgment. The bear moved farther from the den, but not with purpose. Normally, emerging meant following sound downhill, water first, then birds, then the scattered movement of small animals testing the thaw. Those cues layered themselves naturally, guiding the bear outward without effort. Now there was no layering. The bear walked slowly through the forest, head low, nose working constantly, but finding little that held. Old winter smells lingered, cold bark, decayed leaves, the faint trace of its own den, but nothing new overlaid them. The world had not refreshed itself. Hunger sharpened slightly, not enough to drive haste, but enough to make each step count. The bear's body had shifted into a different economy now. Fat reserves were still present, but the margin had narrowed. Foraging needed to begin soon, or movement itself would become wasteful. The bear reached a fallen log where it had fed in other years. Ants usually stirred here first, drawn upward by warming wood. The bear placed a paw on the log and felt it. Cold. It rolled the log anyway, muscle engaging out of habit. Bark cracked and fell away in dry flakes. Beneath it, the soil was inert. No insects scattered, no smell of life rose. The bear let the log drop back into place. This effort had cost more than it returned. The bear stood there, breathing slowly, recalculating without conscious thought. The forest was not empty, it was delayed. That distinction mattered. Searching everywhere would exhaust reserves before the delay resolved itself. The bear turned toward a ridge where sunlight reached earlier in the day. If warmth existed anywhere, it would gather there first. The climb was gradual but steady, snow thinning underfoot, ground slightly darker. Still no sound. At the ridge top, the bear paused and scanned outward. From here, it could see farther than usual, not because the forest had changed, but because nothing moved to draw the eye back down. No birds lifted, no shadows crossed open spaces. The bear exhaled heavily. This was the kind of spring that punished instinct alone. In other years, movement created opportunity. This year, movement risked draining strength before opportunity appeared. The bear needed to slow not because it was weak, but because the season was withholding. The bear turned and began walking parallel to the ridge instead of descending. This kept elevation and sunlight without committing downhill into colder ground. It was not a search pattern driven by hunger, it was a containment strategy. As it walked, the bear tested the ground with subtle shifts of weight, reading temperature through pads and claws. In one place, soil yielded slightly, not wet, but less rigid. The bear stopped and dug briefly, scraping aside leaves and earth. The soil darkened a little with depth. Moisture existed, just not at the surface. The bear stopped digging. Digging deeper would burn energy and still yield nothing edible. Roots were not active yet. Bulbs remained locked. The bear covered the disturbed ground again, restoring the surface out of habit more than reason. Time passed. Clouds moved slowly overhead, thickening the light without warming it. The bear felt the days slipping by without progress. That, too, was information. Spring was not late everywhere. It was uneven. The bear needed to find the edges where the season had begun, not wait where it had not. With that understanding, the bear changed direction again, angling toward a south-facing slope where rock broke through soil and held heat longer. This was not memory guiding the movement now. It was deduction. The bear walked on, steady and unhurried, conserving strength, aware that the silence outside the den was not something to push through blindly. It was something to work around. And as the forest remained quiet behind it, the bear carried forward a growing certainty that this spring would not reward effort alone, only restraint paired with careful choice. Hunger had arrived, but direction had not. Not yet. The bear stopped moving, not because it had found something, but because movement itself had begun to feel inefficient. Each step pressed weight into ground that returned nothing. Each investigation ended the same way: cold soil, dormant wood, silence. The bear stood on the south-facing slope where rock showed through thin layers of earth. Sunlight touched the stone briefly, warming it just enough to register through paw pads. It was the first clear signal of the day, small but real. The bear stayed there. In past years, stillness this early in spring would have meant missed opportunity. Others would be feeding already. The forest would be active enough that waiting carried risk. This year was different. Waiting conserved more than it cost. The bear lowered itself slowly onto its haunches, then fully to the ground, chest pressed against earth that was marginally warmer than anywhere else it had touched since leaving the den. This was not rest. It was assessment. From this position, the bear listened again. Not for obvious sound, but for the smallest deviations: the scratch of a bird shifting branches, the first insect lifting into air, water finally deciding to move. The forest offered none of it. Time passed without signal. The bear's breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. Energy loss decreased. This was the same logic that governed hibernation, applied in smaller measure. When the environment withheld, the body adapted by matching that restraint. Hunger remained present, but muted. The bear shifted slightly and scraped a paw across the rock, exposing a thin seam of soil trapped in a crack. It sniffed. Nothing edible, but the soil here was softer, warmer. This mattered. Growth would begin here first, even if it had not yet. The bear remembered this place now, not as a feeding site, but as a marker, a place where change would arrive earliest when it finally arrived at all. The bear rose again and moved only a short distance down slope, enough to keep the rock within reach. It did not range outward. It did not descend into cold hollows. It chose proximity to potential over pursuit of absence. Clouds thinned briefly. Sunlight strengthened. The bear felt it along its back and shoulders, fur warming unevenly. Snow at the edge of the slope darkened slightly, beginning to lose structure. Not melting yet, but preparing to. This was the first progression. The bear stood still and allowed it to happen. A bird called once from somewhere far off. Just a single note, tentative, as if testing whether sound belonged here yet. It did not repeat itself. The bear lifted its head. That sound did not mean food, it did not mean safety, but it meant timing was not entirely broken, only delayed. The bear stayed. As the light shifted again and shadows moved, the slope changed incrementally. Soil loosened. Moisture crept closer to the surface. None of it was usable yet, but it was becoming readable. The bear understood now that this spring would unfold in fragments rather than waves. Searching widely would only encounter more fragments without context. Staying near the first signs would allow connection when enough pieces aligned. This was not patience born of abundance. It was patience born of scarcity. The bear settled again, conserving heat and strength, no longer expecting the forest to announce itself loudly. When spring came here, it would do so quietly, one small permission at a time. The silence had not meant absence. It had meant delay. And by choosing stillness over blind search, the bear preserved the only advantage that mattered in a season that refused to speak clearly, the ability to be present when the first real change finally arrived. The change did not arrive all at once. There was no rush of sound, no sudden release of water, no explosive return of life. What came instead was subtle, so small that it could have been missed by anything less patient. The bear felt it through the ground. The soil beneath the south-facing slope gave slightly when weight shifted. Not mud, just loosened earth, no longer locked. The rock that had held warmth all day now released it slowly, feeding the ground beside it instead of losing it to the air. The bear stood. It tested the slope again with careful steps, moving only a few body lengths. Snow along the edge had thinned, its surface dull and granular. A shallow depression held moisture, not flowing water, but pooled melt, trapped long enough to matter. This was enough to begin. The bear lowered its head and sniffed. The scent was faint, but unmistakable now. The first trace of exposed roots waking beneath soil, the dull green promise of shoots not yet visible. Not food yet, but direction. The bear scraped once with a forepaw, gentle and controlled. Soil parted easily this time. Beneath it, the ground was dark and damp. A root showed through, swollen, but still sealed. The bear did not pull it free. Too early. Taking it now would cost more than it returned. The bear covered the spot again and moved a short distance along the slope, repeating the test. Everywhere, the same slow answer came back. Not yet, but soon. That was the difference. The forest behind the bear remained silent, unchanged, still holding winter tightly. But here, along this narrow edge of warmth and restraint, spring had begun to whisper instead of announce. A second bird call sounded, closer this time, followed by another. Sparse. Careful. The forest was not alive yet, but it was listening to itself again. The bear lifted its head and turned slightly, orienting its body along the slope rather than away from it. This would be its boundary now, not the den, not the valley, but this line where the season had started to give. Hunger sharpened, but no longer blindly. It had somewhere to wait. The bear moved only as much as needed, settling again near the rock, conserving energy while maintaining proximity to change. This was no longer uncertainty, it was timing. As evening approached, the air softened. Cold returned, but not with the same authority. The ground held what it had gained. Nothing reversed. That mattered. The bear lay down and rested, not retreating back to the den, not ranging farther out. The decision was clear now. This spring would be lived close to its beginnings, not chased across a landscape that was not ready to give. The silence had been real, but it had not been empty. Spring had not failed to arrive. It had arrived quietly, without ceremony, asking to be noticed rather than heard. And the bear, heavy and patient beside Warming Stone, had noticed. In a year when memory offered little guidance and the world refused to announce itself, survival belonged to the one who understood that silence could still carry meaning, and that sometimes the season did not come roaring back into life. Sometimes it simply leaned forward and waited for someone wise enough to stay.